I love anytime I can get someone who really knows a lot about football and is good at what they do on this show. It's one of my favorite things about running this channel. It's just the old journalist in me. I like interviewing people. But this next one, and I'll say this, I've never had a bad guest, okay? But this next one might be my favorite. His insight and the thoughtfulness that he puts into how he goes about his craft and the way he answers questions allows me to dig a little bit deeper. I think get beyond sort of the surface level questions that we get in a lot of these press conferences, especially during OTAs in this time of year. But Gregg Bell, the Tacoma News Tribune, is joining me today. He was there, obviously, at every open media session through OTAs, and then, of course, the mandatory minicamp this week for those 2 days. He has a lot to say about what he saw, and there's some things that we talked about that I think you might not have heard before. I'll put it that way. So let's get into this. This is Seahawks Forever. I'm Dan. Thanks for watching.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
I'm going to do you another favor today, too, because some of you like to give me crap for just being a little too chatty at the beginning of shows, which I'm never going to change or eliminate because this channel is also about who I am, my conversation style, the way my brain works. And I'm never going to change that just to become a paint by numbers content creator, just giving it to you, get in, get out. But today I'm going to do that. For all the ways you can support the show and all that stuff, I'll talk about that at the end. Let's get into this. My conversation today with Gregg Bell, Seahawks beat reporter from the Tacoma News Tribune. Greg, you've covered a bunch of these now, and there's only so much you can glean from these practices. We'll just give that disclaimer up front. No full contact, have to shy away from contact, can't wear pads. But what do you look for? What can you take away from these off-season workouts?
Well, hi, Dan. Thanks for having me on again. Basically, the personnel groupings and who's playing where. In this case, who's playing center with the first team, who's playing center with the second, right guard. Was in pretty much an even split. We'll get into that. How much they use nickel, how much Devin Witherspoon is inside and Josh Jobe is outside, and how much in the case of Nick Eamon-Worry were they using him as a nickel back? The answer to that is not much. He was a third safety and an outside linebacker more than he was an actual nickel back. So those kind of – because when they are doing that now in June – that is setting up what they're going to do in training camp. It'd be pretty unconventional for them to do one thing all off season and have guys arrayed in a certain spot. And then in training camp, just because pads came on, move them completely around. So the fact that Christian Haynes was the number one center, actually it was split pretty evenly with Anthony Bradford at right guard, Jalen Sundell and Oluwatimi at center. You wouldn't expect when they go to training camp that all of a sudden those guys aren't even in the running for anything. So those kind of indications. But yeah, the throwing in shorts and T-shirts and Sam Darnold throwing interceptions, and it just told me that the defense is way ahead of the offense. And if it wasn't the case, the Seahawks would be in big trouble because the defense is the strength of this team.
Absolutely. I think 15 players back that started games last year, and Brady Henderson posted this the other day. I think 13 players that played 300 or more snaps. I've looked around. It's hard to find another defense in the league that can make that claim. So they should be ahead of the offense, right? Especially with all the changes we saw on that side of the ball. But what can you tell me about energy, vibe, some of those intangible things from year one under Mike McDonald to year two? Was there a discernible difference this year?
Well, Dan, first of all, from Mike McDonald, he was much more comfortable. This time last year, he was still trying to figure out how to run an NFL practice, where he should spend his time, how much should he be in the weeds on defensive position drills, how much time is he going to spend on the offense. He spent a lot more time in the first part of the practices with the offense than he did this time last year. He's doing less hands-on with the defense because Aiden Dirty, his defensive coordinator, who doesn't actually call the plays, he knows now what McDonald wants. So McDonald can delegate some of that responsibility during practices and perhaps even during games, he hasn't mentioned that yet, to Dirty on the defense, which will give him more time, McDonald, to work with new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak. So there was much more of a comfort. There's much more of a rapport with McDonald and the players. He didn't know them either this time last year, and now he does. One thing that Leonard Williams discussed that I ended up writing a whole story about, the News Tribune, newstribune.com, was that the defensive coaches are having players get up and give to their teammates their why.
Yeah.
And these are intensely personal meetings, Williams was explaining. Ernest Jones was the latest to do it on Wednesday, last day of minicamp. And guys are bringing in like pictures of themselves when they were kids, pictures of their parents, some of whom are deceased, pictures of their family members. Williams told the story. So Williams has yet to go in front of the team. He figures he's going to do that during training camp. But when Williams was talking about it, it begged the question that I finally asked Williams when he was done talking. I said, well, Leonard, what's your why? And he talked about being homeless and living sometimes in and out of motels with people he barely knew in Daytona Beach, Florida, when he was growing up. And this was when he growing up to, and then when he was in Mainland High School in Daytona Beach. And he said it was a football coach there who ended up going to the University of Illinois as an assistant and ended up being a mentor also to Devin Witherspoon, that showed him the love of football, that made him love football and got him out of a wayward path and got his life turned around. He ended up going to USC, this coach, and Leonard Williams, of course, signed with USC out of Mainland High School in Daytona Beach, Florida, because of this coach. And now Leonard Williams has made $132 million in his 10-year career after being homeless as a kid. That's his why. But Williams's point was, when we're learning this about each other, I'm going to really care more about the guy next to me on the line of scrimmage or behind me in the defense in the middle of games or in the middle of training camp in August when they're starting to slog and tired of it. That there's a bondedness that is much more, it's much deeper, Williams said, than it was this time last year. And he credits that for part of the reason. They are much more committed. I was really surprised, Dan, at the participation level for the off-season voluntary portions, both the training and the OTAs. I've covered teams, Raiders and Seahawks, that have been rolling and everything's fine with contracts that didn't have 100% participation like this year's team did. Mm-hmm. 32-year-old Jaron Reed, he doesn't need to be here. Jonathan Hankins has a ranch down in Texas with kids. He doesn't need to be here in June on organized team activities, voluntary. They were. And they said they wanted to, one, show the younger players, the 11-man draft class and about a dozen undrafted rookies, but also they wanted to show their support for Mike McDonald and his coaching staff, and that they were here to show them that they were behind them and that they were bought in to what they're trying to do here. And what they're trying to do here, of course, on offense is all brand new.
And it feels like sort of a kind of an undercurrent to all of that, sort of an alternative potential storyline if things had worked out differently, that's sort of hiding in the shadows that I don't think has gotten a lot of attention. But that does seem to be one of the biggest stories coming out of camp, is the buy-in and the enthusiasm and the togetherness. That might have been very, very different had things not gone the way they did in February and March for the Seahawks, right? If Geno Smith and DK Metcalf were still here, and if they didn't have their contracts resolved as they wanted to, this could have been a very different offseason.
Absolutely. And in Metcalf's case, he'd be entering the last year of his deal. Yeah. Had he not been traded, Smith would be entering the last year of his deal. And the Seahawks would be, at this point, close to, if not already, have re-signed one or both of them. But those guys, especially Smith, 35 years old, he's set in his ways, and he'd be learning his third offense in 3 years. Mm-hmm. And there'd be some reluctance to just buy into a brand new system of Clint Kubiak, which is very run heavy and is going to take away passing opportunities for a guy who wants a new deal, which will probably be his final multi-year deal, which the Raiders have since given him. But a $40 million a year quarterback who thinks he's a top 10 guy doesn't want to hand the ball off 30 times a game.
Right.
Sam Darnold will, because Darnold knows that that's where his success is going to be this season. Sam Darnold is only going to be as good as they run the ball, which means he's only going to be as good as his offensive line run blocks. Geno Smith doesn't have that mentality. Geno Smith wants to wing it all over the yard and make all the money he can before he retires. Sam Darnold's only 27 years old, so it's a completely different mindset for the quarterback than it would have been had Smith been here. Metcalf, I thought, was going to get the next $100 million Seahawks contract. But once Dan told Mike McDonald and John Schneider he didn't want to be here anymore, or that he thought he could get more money elsewhere, more to the point, McDonald, unlike Pete Carroll, if it was Pete Carroll, he would have flown Metcalf's ass out to his home in Maui or in North Shore of the Big Island in Hawaii, and they would have kumbaya'd it, and they said, we can make this work. Hey, we took the shirts off in the combine. We love each other. We'll make this work. Mm-hmm. And they'd have made the money work. McDonald, if you say you don't want to be here, see ya. Yeah. He doesn't have that bonding and background with all these players. He's a bottom line, youngest head coach in the league. He doesn't have all those intangibles and personal relationships that Carroll builds his empire up on. And so as soon as Metcalf said he wanted to go shopping, see you later. Same thing with Geno Smith. As soon as Smith said he wanted $40 million plus and the Seahawks only wanted to be 30, 35, McDonald didn't mess around. He said, let's go to find Sam Darnold. Free agency starts in 4 days. But screw this. We're not going to negotiate with Smith. Bam, done. So it's way different, to say the least, with Mike McDonald.
And that approach could certainly backfire on a coach in an organization, right? If players don't feel like they're wanted or needed, but yet, as you've already described, it's the opposite of that in camp. That says a lot about how players feel about McDonald and what he's building there, doesn't it?
Well, yes, and I will tell you what has made the buy-in work this offseason, Dan, is how the latter half of 2024 went for the defense. When they brought in Ernest Jones and he transformed them, and all of a sudden they were a top 5 defense at times at the end of last season. Guys like Leonard Williams, Julian Love, Devin Withers. Oh, okay. Not only is this 37-year-old defensive guru got a bunch of crazy innovative ideas for defense with all these code words and changes at the snap, it's working. We just didn't have the right guys. And now we got Ernest Jones. Boom, it works. So the buy-in comes from the defensive side saying this guy not only he's young and knows what he's doing, it works. And we can make this work. Now they got to bring the offense up to speed.
Ernest Jones is interesting because I was surprised at the number that Seahawks were able to get him signed at, both the total, agent number and the guaranteed number, especially given his relative youth still and his production and how he did transform that defense. And then he spoke this week. We knew that Schneider told us right before the draft that he had a little knee cleanup thing. I talked to a Rams reporter last year who was shocked that they gave up on him and moved him for such low draft capital as they did to Tennessee originally. And at that time, he said there's some whispers about maybe some concerns about the knee. Jones admitted this week that the knee's been bothering him for 2 years and that this cleanup he had, that he's feeling great and it's something he's wanted to do. Is that why they got a discount on the contract?
That and he wants to be here. I mean, he was open. He wasn't like, hey, I want to go test my market value. Most guys, Dan, when they're entering their first free agent, this was his first chance of free agency. That was the end of his rookie deal. Once they get to the point that their contract is ended, they want to go shop so they can see what their max value. That's the contract these guys have played football since they were 6 years old for. Why they got up and did two-a-days and coaches practices and weightlifting is for the second NFL contract, not the first one that's slotted. It's the open market second one, the first free agency deal or your second contract from the team that drafted you. That's the deal that everyone plays for and takes painkillers and kills themselves for. That second deal. And so he was on the cusp of that. But instead of maxing out, he was really open and not like he was leveraging the Seahawks at all in that locker room in Inglewood on the final game of the last season. He said, I want to be here. I'm going to make this work. Don't worry about what my agent's saying about, we're far away. We've stopped talking. Nah, we're going to get this done. He wasn't trying to max out his deal. He wasn't trying to negotiate in the media. He just said, agent, get it done.
Yeah.
So I thought he was going to get a top 5 middle linebacker contract, and he's down closer to 10. And he certainly didn't play like that. So, yeah, to your point, now it's also only 3 years, so he could be a free agent again before he's 30 years old, which is what a lot of players want to do. But I will tell you, I don't have to tell you, but listeners, watchers can be reminded, he transformed them.
Right.
They were misfit in the middle of their defense with Dotson just getting dragged 5 and 6 yards. When Ernest Jones hits someone, they go to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Period, end of story, with no yards after contact at all. And that's what you need in a middle linebacker. And then he wants to be here. He said he's tired of moving his young son and his wife around. And that all played to the Seahawks' favor.
I'm excited to get into some individual performances and some position battles, but let's stay on that note for a moment because this is kind of that time of year now where the veterans get a break for 6 weeks, and this is where business gets done a lot of times. And the Seahawks have a very consistent pattern in recent years of handing out some of their bigger extensions for players who are eligible for them right when training camp opens. They just announced this week that training camp starts on the 23rd this year. You can just look back the last couple of years. DK signed his last big extension on the 28th of July. Julian Love on the 25th. Uchenna Nwosu on the 27th. There's a number of players that are eligible for extensions this year. Some, it's questionable about whether it would be smart football to sign them early, but a guy like Charles Cross certainly would be deserving of one as he enters into his 4th year. Do you expect any big deals to get done this training camp?
Cross is the one I think was when they picked up his 5th-year option, which John Schneider rarely does for first-round picks. I was told at the combine they were going to do it not because of wanting to pay him $17 million guaranteed for 2026, but to buy time to get a new deal done without that specter hanging over him of the 5th-year option. Well, now that they gave him the 5th-year option, they're going to be on the hook for $17 million on a cap charge next year because all of that guaranteed 5th year goes right on the cap. They don't want that. So they have an incentive to give him a multi-year deal that would give him a better than $17 million cap number next year. But Cross now has some leverage in that he doesn't have to agree to just anything they give him because he knows he's got $17 million guaranteed in the bank for next year. So there's some give and take to go there. That's not when we asked Charles Cross this week about it. He just said, I'm just worried about this year. And that answer told me was, I don't have to worry about this right now if I don't get an offer that I want. But Cross would be the one that I would think would be the first in line to get one at the deal. Now that Geno Smith and DK Metcalf are gone, those were the candidates that would have gotten it by now or at the start of training camp as well. They're not going to do it yet because he's got 1 year after this one left on his deal. But Devin Witherspoon is out there as a huge ship at sea that's going to come in next year at this time, that he will reset the cornerback market. He will be a top 2 or 3 cornerback. He'll be the highest paid cornerback the Seahawks have ever had, including Richard Sherman, because of the way the market is. Yeah. The Seahawks, Snyder has to think, and Matt Thomas have to have that in the back of their minds when they plot out for this year.
Where do you stand on Mafe? Because I feel like, we've been waiting for this ceiling, right? All this athletic ability to kind of come together. I feel like he's a guy that I want to see it for one more year. But yet I also don't want to be stuck having to pay market value if he has a huge year, which he's certainly potential if he puts it all together. Where do you think how does the team view Mafe, and where do you think they stand on that?
Well, Mike McDonald views him differently than Pete Carroll did. And McDonald rode Mafe really hard last year in training camp and was trying to get a lot, and Derek Hall for that matter, but especially Mafe. I don't think Mafe, let's put it this way. My sense is that McDonald needs to see more out of Mafe. And he wants him more to be a run stopper and perhaps an every down linebacker where he was starting to get groomed as an outside edge rusher and passing downs. They may need him to do more than that. I don't think McDonald's sold on him, which is why I don't put him in the very front of the line for the next deal coming up. I'm with you. I think he's going to have another prove it season, but at that position, edge rusher, you have a prove it season and you start proving it, you're going to have a huge raise off of his rookie deal. That's kind of the risk the Seahawks are willing to take, because I think McDonald has a different view of him and has a different mindset of how his edge rushers can work. He mentioned at the end of minicamp that he's still trying to find the right 4 pass rushers to put together. He's not sure who that's going to be getting into training camp. This is a prove it season for Boye and Mafe, yes.
Do you think Clowney is still a possibility, or is his skill set too redundant with what they are expecting from DeMarcus Lawrence, who they signed this offseason?
Right. I think DeMarcus Lawrence's arrival makes Clowney less so. And also, if Pete Carroll was here and the relationships, Clowney would be an option. But now that they have Lawrence, and in fact, they gave him a multi-year deal, not just a 1 year, as they're often at that age, they often just sign guys for 1 year. So when you see a multi-year deal for a 30-something, you figure, wait a minute, okay, he's going to be around a little bit. They have some plans for him. So to answer your question, Marcus Lawrence, I think, is the guy that many fans thought Clowney was going to be this offseason.
You've brought up Pete a number of times, and now we have a 2-year or 2 off-season sample size anyway of how McDonald operates and thinks and acts. Is it fair to say that Pete is driven more by emotion when it comes to these personnel decisions, whereas McDonald is driven more by intellect and reason? Yeah,
and yes, and also Carroll is driven by personal relationships and personal history. He invests so much personally in his coaching that ends up carrying a long way. It's one of the things he really regretted about the Russell Wilson trade. I can tell you, Dan, he was the last guy on planet Earth that wanted to trade Russell Wilson. He was the last guy on planet Earth that thought they weren't going to trade Russell Wilson until he got Wilson together one-on-one with him that offseason. And he heard from Wilson firsthand that Wilson didn't want to be here anymore and thought that his pastures were greener somewhere else. His legacy could get furthered somewhere else. And until he saw what Denver offered Schneider at the combine, that was the first moment that Carroll went, oh, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
But again, that was a relationship-driven thing. All the players that come back, the reason that all these players come back after getting cut, Richard Sherman was at minicamp the other day.
Yeah, he was laughing it up, smiling.
Yeah. Richard Sherman came out of here cussing and screaming and yelling. It's like he's never going to be here.
He was just criticizing John Schneider a week before on Twitter. Yeah.
That's Pete Carroll. That's Pete Carroll's legacy. McDonald doesn't have any of that, nor should he. He's 36 now, 37 years old. Yeah. He didn't draft any of those guys. He's a bottom line. The other thing in play here, Dan, is Pete Carroll was the ultimate authority that made all the final decisions, and Schneider had to ultimately listen to what Carroll wanted. It's vice versa now. And McDonald doesn't have that cachet. McDonald has to listen to what Schneider wants. That part of the issues the Seahawks had last year at the beginning of the season, Dotson and Baker as linebackers being primary examples, were because those were not Mike McDonald guys. Those were Schneider guys. And if the head coaching dynamic was the Pete Carroll way, the head coach would have decided who those middle linebackers were, not the GM. And only now did McDonald get the GM on board and say, no, this is actually what kind of guy we need. Go get Ernest Jones. That whole 2 months of Dotson and Baker would have never happened under Pete Carroll because the head coach would have gotten his way. That's all the bumping into walls and transition stuff that happened last year because of the transition change.
All right, now let's get into some of this specific stuff. And let's start with the offensive line. It's obviously been a huge topic conversation this entire offseason and really for 5-6 years.
10.
But there's so much, as you pointed out at the top, about what you can take away from these mini camps. Is there's so many more knowns now. It seems like this time a year ago, we only knew Charles Cross was a left tackle, and the other 4 positions were all up in the air. We didn't know if Abe Lucas would make it back, and we didn't know who were going to play the other 3 spots. Now it sure seems like, Gray Zabel installed as the starter from day one, took all the first team reps. Abe Lucas, as healthy as he's been since his rookie year, and so the already we're ahead of the curve, right? We're 3 out of 5. And then you mentioned Oluwatimi and Sundell seem to be in a battle at center, with Olu in a slight lead, and then Haynes a slight lead over Bradford at right guard. I was a little concerned, as I was last year. I thought it was one of the biggest mistakes they made last year, just waiting too long to nail that down. Carrying some of those competitions into the season, I thought really messed with the potential for continuity there. But just as I mentioned it on my show the other day that I was still a little concerned, then McDonald came out and said, look, we'd like to solve this and get this done sooner than later and decide who our starters are. As we sit here today, who do you think are going to win those 2 jobs?
I think Jalen Sundell is going to be the starter at center, and they're going to have 2 North Dakota State guys side by side on the offensive line.
Do you say that because as he's gone through OTAs, have his reps increased?
It was flipped where Oluwatimi started the OTAs at the first center, and then would split roughly evenly with Sundell. By mini camps, it was flipped where Sundell was the first, and then basically Oluwatimi splitting with him. I rarely have heard, Dan, in my 20 plus years of doing this, coaches and GMs and personnel and scouts go on and on about a second-year undrafted rookie like they did Jalen Sundell this offseason. Unsolicited, I was hearing, man, this new system really fits Jalen Sundell. Man, he moves really well. He's played all the positions. He can really work in this outside zone. Yeah. I was like, wait a minute. He didn't even play. He barely played at all last year and was at 2 or 3 positions. You would have thought he was like Dave Remington or Mike Webster, the way they were talking about how the center is perfectly fit for this system. That doesn't mean a lot until he actually proves it. But again, they think the same of Christian Haynes in this system, that this outside zone, moving laterally instead of just road grader blocking the guy over you, is going to fit Haynes and Sundell better. Bradford, to me, from what I've seen, is the Mauler, DJ Fluker type. The guy, just a nasty guy over you. I'm just going to kill you over. They don't need that anymore. They need guys who will actually run past the dude that's right over him that you would normally try to drive into the ground to get to your assigned zone outside. So scheme-wise, you wouldn't think Bradford fits as well. McDonald had an interesting comment about Bradford the other day, saying he really has changed his body composition, but he realizes this is go time, and then he really has to go here in training camp. He's got to prove that this new system fits him as much as they think it fits Christian Haynes.
It's cool to hear about Sundell. I've been bullish on Oluwatimi from the moment he was drafted. I've always said he looks to me like one of those players that could play. He could start for 10 years in this league, never make a Pro Bowl. And there's value in that, right? Just being a good, solid player. But the athletic profile from Sundell is so enticing. And he just, every time he's gotten a chance to play, it just seems like that the ceiling's certainly higher. So that'll be an interesting one to watch.
Let's not forget, if Connor Williams hadn't just upped and retired on them last year, Oluwatimi would not have started last year. Oluwatimi had a chance to win that job in the offseason heading into training camp, and he didn't, is why they went out and got Connor Williams in the first place, coming off of a torn ACL.
That is interesting. And I remember at the time Williams was acquired, I looked at the RAS charts for Connor Williams and Jalen Sundell are almost identical, like really, really elite athletes, similar size, specs, and everything else. So it makes sense that they would like him in that scheme. But let's talk about the tackles, because this gets really fascinating. They came in together, obviously, in that 2022 draft, and it was like they just fixed a positional problem in one fell swoop in the first and third round. Little different career arcs since then, right? Cross obviously being the first round pick. As we mentioned, he's under contractual control, to use a baseball term, for 2 more years, whereas Lucas would be up at the end of this year as a third round pick. You don't get that 5th year option. And obviously so much uncertainty with him, with the knee. It took a year for them to figure out what it was. And then it took him a year to fix it and rehabilitate from it. Does he need to prove he can stay healthy this year for them to consider signing him to a second contract?
It's why I don't think he won't be. Normally, if he wasn't injured, he would probably be in line to get one of these at the start of training camp extensions. But let's not forget, Schneider has rarely given second contracts to offensive linemen he's drafted, for good reason. For 10 years, offensive line's been a mess. But you have to go back to probably Okung. And let me think, right after that was, I'm trying to think the last couple drafted guys they've given second year. I'm talking full second years, not just a 5th year option to. It's rare. Yeah. So yes, Lucas has to prove he is in fact as good as he thinks he is. They did pace him some with Josh Jones, the swing tackle, the free agent they signed from Baltimore this offseason. Jones was getting some first team right tackle reps in minicamp. That I took it as a pacing thing to just preserve Lucas. Lucas lumbers around like a bear, and he kind of looks like he's limping all the time anyway. But that's because he's 6'6" and 325 pounds. Yeah. You're not gonna walk like Bambi when you're that big. So when people come to practices and they see him, I was talking to someone who hadn't been to a practice yet, and his first one was on Wednesday. They said, "Man, he looks like he's still hurt." I said, "Well, he always walks like that." But yeah, he's got to prove that. Carroll a couple of years ago used the term chronic for that knee issue. I've talked to Lucas about that. Yeah, no, I was good, and then I injured it a couple of years ago. It's a patellar tendon. He told me the day after the season ended last year that the surgeons told him it would be a full 12 months before he felt better. A full 12 months was after the Rams game that ended last season. So Lucas played basically far less than 100%. And now he says he's so much, his words to me were night and day compared to where he was this time last year or even any time during the season.
And I've had fans suggest to me that, well, they're not going to give significant money to Cross and Lucas, to which I reply, well, they don't have to pay any of their interior guys for a couple of years. So you could, if you're looking at the position group as a whole, you could absolutely justify paying your 2 tackles if that's all you have to pay. But they've also invested a lot of resources in that position in the last couple of years. And depending on the development of Michael Jarrell or what they think of Mason Richmond, or I know Jones is only on a 1-year deal, but if they love him, they may have multiple options there. They might be in a pretty good spot at that position.
If I was them, Dan, I'd pay the 2 guys who are the best guys on the line as much as I could for as long as I could, because that line has been so broken. If you think Charles Cross is the left tackle, then pay him. If you think that Abe Lucas is healthy, pay him too. And so you can have at least 2 positions you can count on what has been just a mess across 5 positions for a decade. They'll figure out center. They sure think Ray Zabel is going to be a second-year contract guy as well, left guard. But yeah, I wouldn't pinch pennies on a line that's been so bad that they've been trying to save money on for so many years.
Do you think the shift we saw this offseason with Schneider being willing to throw such big money at Will Fries and then invest a first-round pick on a guard signals a shift in his philosophy, and that he'd be willing to invest in that spot?
Yeah, Absolutely. He needed to change, Dan, the input to get the output to change. If you keep putting in the same input meaning evaluation and drafting, you're going to get the same output, which is crap sandwich for the last 10 years at the offensive line. Yeah. So you have to change the input or else the cake's going to taste the same. He changed the input. He listened to Clint Kubiak. He listened to John Benton, his new offensive line guys. They have 47 years of coaching offensive line between Rick Dennison and John Benton. And he listened to them. He listened to Steve Hutchinson that said, yeah, draft this Gray Zabel. I know he's from North Dakota State. I know you haven't drafted a guard this high since me in 2001, but take him. So Schneider didn't do that before. He listened to his scouts and personnel side, and they went and drafted skill position players instead of they went and did D. Eskridge instead of Creed Humphrey. I'm sorry to bring it up again, but
we bring it every year.
He had to change the input, and he did. And we'll see if the results change, but it's a good start that you're not just still banging your head against the wall with the same input, trying to get a different output.
And then, of course, everybody wants to talk about the quarterbacks. And, there was a couple of rough practices early on for Sam Darnold. But to your point, he's going up against a confident, cohesive, experienced, talented defense. And as it was pointed out by several players over the last couple of weeks, especially the 7-on-7 stuff, the linebackers don't have to respect the run. They can kind of cheat in their drops and everything else. And Sam's going to take chances. What are your general impressions? How did he play?
He was not impressive. He was, but again,
are we talking Sam Howell last year? Everyone looking at each
other. Some of his throws actually reminded me of Sam Howell. I mean, he missed by 10 yards sometimes. He was behind a lot of receivers. He was wide of them on the sideline. He was affected by Eamon Warry blitzing. They didn't pick up Eamon Warry's blitzes. McDonald kept sending Eamon Warry off the edge, and nobody picked him up time and time and time again. This big number 3 who looks like Cam Chancellor. I'm not sure how you wouldn't pick him up. And then Darnold would just lawn dart the ball into the ground. It was, well, I guess the best way to put it, Dan, it was not an impressive first impression, but that's okay. If it doesn't matter what they do throwing the ball in underwear, it matters what they do blocking with pads in the run game. Sam Darnold's only going to be as good as his run game is. That's what I said off the top, and that's the key to the season. The key to the season is not him throwing 4,300 yards and 35 touchdowns. He's not. If the offense goes the way Clint Kubiak wants and McDonald wants, he won't get the chance to throw for 4,300 yards because he won't throw that much. I think they should run 30 times a game. I'm talking down 2 touchdowns they should run. They got to run some more so that Sam Darnold can play an honest defense for a change. Geno Smith played the most dishonest defenses in the league. They were 27 and 28th in the NFL last 2 years in running. The play that I keep thinking about that they absolutely have to change as an offense was a 4th down play in their own end against the Giants early last October. Brian Burns, they tried to run a bootleg, a play action fake inside to Zach Charbonnet. And Brian Burns, the new New York Giants defensive end, didn't even look at the play fake, Dan. He put his head down and put his helmet straight into the chest of Geno Smith. No. He was running straight to Smith no matter what Smith. He knew Smith wasn't going to hand off because he knew the Seahawks couldn't run. Sack, end of game, they lose to the 3-win Giants at home. That's what their offense became. The fact Geno Smith got any yards and threw for any touchdowns was remarkable to me. And that tells you how much of a pure passer he is. Sam Darnold is not Geno Smith in just terms of talent throwing the football. He's not. I would say, and a lot of people get mad at me saying this, I think they're not as good at starting quarterback, than they were last year for this year. They're better at the quarterback position. They finally drafted a quarterback of the future that they could project out and work with in Jalen Milroe. Drew Lock is eons better than Sam Howell. You and I threw better than Sam Howell last year, and we didn't throw it. Sam Howell was a mistake, period, end of story. Yeah. From the beginning of training camp, he was a mess. He couldn't hit Lake Washington from the side of the practice field. It was just bad. And we saw what happened when he was ill-prepared when he came in and had to play against the Packers. So they got better at the position, but I don't think they got better at quarterback for this year. But again, they're not going to ask Sam Darnold to do what they asked Geno Smith to do the last 2 years. Sam Darnold's going to hand off, whether he wants to or not, he's going to hand off far more than Geno Smith did. because that's what McDonald brought in everybody for. That's why Kubiak's here. That's why they drafted some Gray Sable. That's why the two new offensive line, Dennison and Jonathan, are here. They're not going to do all that and then throw the ball 35 times a game. And if they do, that means that this season has gone awry. Sam Darnold has 2 years to prove himself. I know it's a 3-year deal. I know some people say they can get out of it after 1 year. He's got 2 years. By then, they hope Milroe has developed under Andrew Janocko and the new quarterback's coach and Clint Kubiak as a better thrower. And boy, did he get proved from the start of May to the middle of June. We could talk about that. And it's very notable to me that Drew Lock signed for 2 years, not 1.
Right.
So they've got 2 years now with those two guys before they can see if Milroe is ready to go.
You wrote extensively about how good he looked the last 2 practices, that he had his best 2 throwing days, and you weren't the only one. Several other people who were there at the VMAC said the same thing. Have you seen enough from him to be convinced that he could be the future starter?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen him read defenses. I haven't seen him face blitzes. I haven't seen him get hit so hard that he has to drag himself off the ground. I haven't seen any of that. I haven't seen them running him on the edge. Can he run over NFL linebackers like he ran over SEC linebackers? We'll see. We haven't seen that yet. I do know this. Clint Kubiak is going to run probably 5 or 6 plays. The opener against San Francisco, the week 2 in Pittsburgh, they're going to have Jalen Milroe run a package of plays, short yardage, goal line, whatever, middle of a series, not just for those games, so that the rest of the 15 opponents have to game plan against that dimension that the Seahawks have never had. I was talking to Dave Bowling out on the field the other day about this, my former News Tribune colleague, and I said, yeah. Dave, I don't think the Seahawks have ever had a quarterback with this dimension. And he brought up Terrell Pryor, and he said, Pryor's the only guy I can think of. And I said, that's a good point. And I didn't think of Pryor because he never played in games that really mattered or got meaningful snaps. But even then, they didn't have a package of plays for Pryor. They just hoped he wasn't going to enter the game. They're going to have a package of plays for Jalen Milroe so that they can run the ball. It's why I asked about the Taysom Hill comparison after the draft, and I knew the way I answered it, I was going to get this. I didn't do a good job of answering or asking the question. And of course, McDonald answered. I said, "Oh, this is Kubiak. So this isn't Taysom Hill. He's a completely different player." But my point was, Kubiak had a package of plays for Hill at both tight end and runner and quarterback that defensive coordinators had the game plan for every game. They now have that in Jalen Milroe. They've never had that here. So they are much more dynamic and harder to defend just because Jalen Milroe is on the roster. And I think that's why you're going to see the package in September in place for him.
There's been a lot of conversation about how great that sounds and how that would make sense to be part of the plan. But I think Brock Heward was first bringing up a few weeks ago or it was Daniel Jeremiah on with those guys saying that, look, a lot of teams have drafted guys like this. Not that there are many that are like Jalen Milroe, but with the similar profile and talked about a specialized package. But the disconnect between upstairs and downstairs, they just don't have the guts to pull it off. And they just don't want to disrupt rhythm or whatever. And you have to go all the way back. I talked about this with Max Brown last week. You have to go all the way back to Cordell Stewart in 1995, 96.
That's
years
right.
in the league. And what I was reminded of when I went back and looked at Stewart's numbers the first year, it was very limited as a rookie. And then he was a real weapon his second year and became the full-time starter at quarterback his third year. That would seem to be a very reasonable or hopeful arc for Milroe, but I forgot how often they threw the football to him also. Do you think there's any possibility they do that where they kind of go in motion or whatever and they split things out? Darnold and Milroe are on the field at the same time?
I haven't seen it yet. I didn't see any hint of that at all.
Okay.
I didn't see Darnold or Milroe in anything but the third team.
Yeah, I'd forgotten they used slash that way.
Yeah, they did. And I'm from Pittsburgh, and I remember that vividly. And Bill Cowher wasn't really into that. It took him a while to get sold on that.
That doesn't surprise me.
To even use them at all.
Yeah.
I think, Dan, they're going to preserve him for the specialized roles and not at wide receiver as it stands now.
Mostly short yardage, you think?
Maybe a second down or in the middle of a drive just to change it up and make a defense have to honor him I could see him doing it on 2nd and 8 from their own 35. Not necessarily short yardage, but mainly short yardage, you would think.
Yeah. One One last question for you. I know my viewers still very concerned about what they perceive as a lack of depth at the nose tackle position. I know they added Riley Mills, and it certainly seems more optimistic now that he might be back earlier in the season than Schneider had indicated, but he's not a nose tackle. No. And it was such a good nose tackle draft, and they bypassed that position. Are you along those lines? Are you concerned? You think they still need to add there?
I do. They got Brandon Peely from multiple teams. I've had people in Denver say that he was not very good at all for the Broncos last preseason. Quentin Bohanna is someone that they like. They've had around for a couple of years, but he's been injured. He was on a bike all of OTAs and minicamp. It'll be important for him to get on the field when the pads come on in training camp. I don't get the sense they want to use Byron Murphy as much as nose tackle as he did last year. They have to play Murphy more than 49% of snaps. They have to. He's better in more varied roles. He's a good pass rusher, potentially great pass rusher who needs to be on the field, I think, as a 3-tech on some passing situations. They need to play him more than 49%, and I don't think it's a nose tackle. And so are you going to rely on Jonathan Hankins to have 60+% of snaps last year? He was in the 60th percentile in snaps for the first couple months of the season at 30+ years old. That was way more than he'd ever played. And then by the end of the season, he was playing 20-some% because he just couldn't last out. They can't think that they can count on him to do that. So Peely is right now, and the guys they have in-house, someone that they need to hope that they can get some rotational snaps with, depending on if Bohanna comes back. To your point, this team has habitually signed 30+-year-old interior defensive linemen in the summer.
Yeah, and have a pretty darn good track record.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And it's worked out for them. I can remember at least half the training camps I've covered them signing somebody like that at the end of August, and it wouldn't surprise me there. One thing you haven't mentioned, it wouldn't surprise me either. I think it just makes too much sense that John Schneider's going to kick the tires on Jaire Alexander. He knows everybody in Green Bay, of course. He knows Alexander's back. He knows why the Packers didn't give him what they wanted, and now whether it was guaranteed money or a pay cut or whatever it ended up being, why the Packers didn't keep him. He also knows his injury history and the fact he's only played 34 of 68 games the last 4 seasons. But they're going to look at it. I thought it was interesting that McDonald didn't dismiss it outright when Bob Condotta of the Seattle Times asked McDonald about his cornerback depth on Wednesday. And he said, well, we're always looking to improve our team. He knows Alexander's out there.
He's learned the John Schneider answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It sounded just like Schneider.
Yeah, we know they kicked the tires on Shaquille Griffin, Rasul Douglas. I just wonder, like, I've heard some things about, I've heard Jaire Alexander's personality described as interesting. He's a little bit of a different guy. Mm-hmm. He's a smaller corner. He certainly has the injury history. 3 of the last 4 years, he's basically played half a season. But when he's on the field, he's one of the best cover corners in the league. Like, does he fit?
Well, I would think that would be a Josh Jobs spot when Witherspoon goes inside, that if they signed a veteran, it would be at the expense of Jobs' playing time. People forget Josh Jobe played 65% of snaps last year, and he spent half the season on the practice squad being elevated time and again before they finally signed him to the active roster in November. Carl Scott loves Josh Jobe. He coached him at Alabama. Part of the reason they claimed they signed him after the Eagles waived him late August was because of Carl Scott. Of course, Scott's one of the only holdovers of the previous Pete Carroll, the only holdover last year, and he's back again. They have a new defensive backs coach to go with Carl Scott, but Scott and Mike McDonald really love Josh Jobe, which makes me think it would have to be a really, really team-friendly deal with Alexander. And if you believe the reports, Alexander's going to have a lot of suitors that would probably drive his price up to where the Seahawks wouldn't want to pay him for what they have. But they do like Jobe a lot. Nehemiah Pritchard is someone they drafted that they're intrigued by, who got exposed when he had to play last year and he wasn't ready to do it against some of the top receivers. They signed a Shamar Jean Charles, free agent who's been in the league 5 years. They've got guys, but they don't have a Jaire Alexander in there. But I mean, we'll see. You're right. They've already looked at Shaquille Griffin, who has since also visited with Pete Carroll's Raiders. Surprise. So it wouldn't surprise me if a corner is one of their next outside free agents.
Do you expect Spoon to play more outside this year?
You know, I thought that, and then I saw OTAs in minicamp, and if that's any indication, no. They were using – now that could have been because
when you said that Emin Wari wasn't being used, in the nickel. That perked my ears up.
Yeah, it was. They used Eamon Worry. I mean, he was doing outside linebacker position drills, Dan, and then they were rushing him off the edge in some 11-on-11 scrimmages. When they went big nickel, they did bring him in as the third safety. But when they went standard nickel, it was Witherspoon inside and Jobe outside. They did. We'll see. They're going to give Eamon Worry so much. He is a really unique player. And you can see the wheels turning in McDonald's head when you watch practices and how they potentially want to use him. I came out of the OTAs and mini camps thinking far more. They're going to use Eamon Worry far more in far many different situations than I thought they were when they drafted him. I thought he was a little more of a layaway here, red shirt here first. He's right in with the ones. Witherspoon is ripping him just like he's one of the guys. He looks very comfortable. He looks gigantic. I mean, he looked 220 pounds in shells. He didn't have shoulder pads on. He looks like 240 or 250, not even in shoulder pads. I hesitate to say this, but they brought it up when they drafted him. He looks bigger than Cam Chancellor. We'll see if he plays like that. But just walking onto the field, he looks bigger than 31 was, and he's certainly bigger than the number 3 they used to have. It's completely opposite.
You got any vacation plans over the next 6 weeks? A little bit of downtime for yourself and your family?
Yeah, there is downtime. I'm probably going to go backcountry camp. My wife loves backcountry camping. Our daughter's off at Coast Guard Academy summer training, so we don't see her till August. My son's back working here at Post. He just graduated from Washington State, and he's working here in Seattle.
Go Cougs.
So go Cougs. Yeah, that was. By the way, as an aside, the pride that people have in Pullman. I didn't really get to know it. I was only parachuting in there to cover games and leaving again until my son attended there. It's so impressive. That place is so beautiful, and the people absolutely love being there. And I know it's not for everyone, as you know, but we really were thoroughly impressed by Pullman. Loved our experiences there. He loved it there, and yeah, we have a whole new appreciation for the Cougs.
It's a special place. I'm born and raised in Seattle, and I acknowledge how beautiful the UW campus is, but the fact it's in the middle of a big city, it's just different. You know, I remember going away from home for my first time and driving through just nothing but wheat fields for 4.5 hours. And then all of a sudden you come down over the hill and it just kind of opens up in front of you. You see this gorgeous campus. I think because it's so isolated is why everybody is so tight and so connected and takes so much pride in it. And also the underdog thing. I mean, you can't do that. You know, we're always the ones swimming upstream. So
I hope they win the national championship in football and basketball for all that they've been heaped upon them or the Beavs. I hope the Beavs win the College World Series this week. Everyone deserves, after what they've done to the Beavs and Cougs, and everyone deserting them. Man,
maybe the Beavs win the College World Series and the Mariners take Arquette number 3. It could happen, right?
They might be drafted higher than 3 the way they're playing.
Well, I'll let you go, man. Enjoy the next 6 weeks. Happy Father's Day weekend to you. Always appreciate the time that you give me to come on the show.
That's great, Dan. I always love to be here. Thank you.
Now, if you'll humor me for a moment, if you're still with me, this is when I'll ask you to please subscribe to the show. Got over 10,000 subscriptions this week. You guys really rallied and helped me get over the hump there. That's a big milestone. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to the channel as I continue striving to be a full-time content creator. Got to talk to Gregg today about how I'll get to meet him in person next month. When I get access to the first few days of training camp. They're going to credential me for those first few days, and then we're going to sit and get to know each other and talk about credentials for the entire season. So if you want to support that venture, subscribe to the channel. That is the best way, but also the more tangible methods are all linked down below. You can sign up for the Patreon channel or a paid membership here. You get exclusive and early access to content. Check out the merch store if you would like. Everything else is listed down below. Tell me what you thought in the comments below. What was your favorite thing that you heard from Gregg today in our conversation? And then for the fathers out there, happy Father's Day weekend. I'm going to take the weekend, be back with you Monday, and move forward. Have some really, really exciting guests that I'm working on. One in particular that I'll be booking next week, a national voice that I know you're going to want to hear. So look, the team might take a break for the next 6 weeks. I won't. I'm going to keep pushing forward, producing content for you. If you want to be notified anytime there's new content, which is almost daily and will continue to be so, hit that bell. Thanks, you guys. at Seahawks Forever on Twitter and Blue Sky. Forever and always, go Hawks.